Hello, welcome to PQ, the one and only Pokemon Cube podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Martin, brought to you with co-host Connor Lavelle. So, I guess final Cube League update for this past Cube League. Connor, you want to talk about it since you were in the finals?
Yeah. I lost. I lost.
Okay.
Quite badly, I would say, to Al. I did take a game off of him once again, but I just could not get over the Vibrava in his deck that could one-shot everything I had. I think it was a little bit of an oversight by the balancing team, which is us and the Cube Builder, but you know, it's our responsibility equally so, if not more so, to catch stuff like that, and we didn't. So definitely partially my fault, at least, that card made it through. But it was a good set. It was a fun set, and congrats to Al big time, because I think that's his first Cube League top 8 ever.
Oh, really?
And he won. Yeah, so that's really impressive. And I just think he saw the cards that were really powerful, and he identified that immediately and just really built a deck around them, which is ultimately, I mean, how the best cube decks are built, pushing the most powerful cards to even stronger levels, and he did that really well.
So was Vibrava something that just, was kind of went under the radar, people didn't quite see its potential? I guess for context, for people that aren't aware, so this Vibrava in this cube, for one, colorless energy does 20 damage for each energy in your opponent's discard, and then shovels them back into their deck. So the problem is with Connor's deck, since he's playing a lot of energy for his Typhlosion, like that can add up really quickly. I think also it's awkward because you played Rayquaza EX and hit for weakness. Like, so it's like a one energy commitment is very strong. But like, I guess honestly, I forget about that card too. It's just like something people just didn't think about.
Yeah, we didn't realize that it was in the cube until the league draft actually started.
I see.
And then as soon as one of us saw it, we were like, "Oh no, this is a big problem," but it was too late.
I mean, it's kind of the nice thing though that these games are all free to enter. It's like no one's really like mad that it's a broken card in cube. It happens all the time, but no harm, no foul.
The other stuff in Al's deck, it was too strong, but I think it was reasonable to not realize that it was too strong before we played it a bunch of times. I think the Vibrava was the big miss on our part.
Yeah, Vibrava is scary. Although I do agree that Al built an insanely good deck. I mean, I played him in top 8. He knocked me out top 8, and I thought he had a very streamlinable strategy with the various EVs that he could go into. I also he had 8 Pokédraw. I don't know if I really need to say more than that. That's a really good engine to like be able to utilize. He has access to his whole deck essentially. So I thought he had a really good strategy of playing into that. So he had a lot of great options available to him. I thought picking pretty much whatever evolution he wanted to go into, having access to then shut off abilities with damage buying Ampharos was really strong. Like, he definitely picked the cube meta pretty solidly. Like, damage buying put in a lot of work, especially also he had access to Station Crystals. So I agree that his deck was definitely really good. I also really enjoyed your deck. The finals were actually, from a observer standpoint, very interesting. There was a lot of really good plays going on there. I mean, do you remember any specific ones that stuck out to you when you were playing the game? That
I wish I could say yes, but I don't. I remember top 4 and top 8 a lot better than the finals, but the finals are a bit of a blur, I would say.
I thought, honestly, and this is not really a specific play, but the way you played around the Vibrava, I thought was really smart. And if you guys are wanting to watch these games, hopefully, maybe not by this point, but definitely by this weekend, you'll be able to watch those through top 8, the top cut matches on our YouTube channel. But I thought you were playing around the type Vibrava very well, like the attacks you were going for and the ways you were able to like not commit all of your energy on one attacker. I thought was really smart.
Yeah, I was trying to be really conscious about the Vibrava. I'd lost to it in Swiss, but I'd also played against it in testing before the event started, and I knew that it was going to be a problem in any matchup that I played against it. So I was really keeping an eye out, doing everything that I could to avoid giving him a free knockout with it, and in a lot of the cases that I intended to, I succeeded, but ultimately, both times it came down to an end game of I can do something big, but then he can just revenge it with Vibrava and the game is over. So that was I couldn't play around it the whole time. I just didn't have the tools to.
Yeah, it's really funny because like well, I don't know if funny is the right word, but interesting maybe. At the end of game 3, I thought you had like you're playing really well into not losing, which I thought was great. You're playing to your outs, but man, if the Vibrava wasn't there, I thought you actually might have been able to pull that one out because of the we had Rayquaza EX set up, and then I believe you also had
Latias
EX set up too. And I believe you had a way to prevent the from sniping it with the Latias with the Espeon. I think I had Seeker or something, but like
I had Scoop Up Cyclone left.
That was it. Yeah. That was the right one. So I really appreciate that you were like setting up multiple attackers to play around a bench snipe knockout, which I thought was smart.
Yeah, I was just doing everything that I could in the end game to avoid losing. I did have one out. I still had Double Gust left in deck, and I think I drew for 3 turns, but I was not able to get into it. So I did lose that one. I think both games 1 and 3 were very winnable in the absence of Vibrava, but it's hard to say exactly how games like that would have gone if it wasn't there, because I mean Al could have changed his whole game plan too.
Exactly, yeah. But I mean I thought they were good games to watch though. So if you haven't seen those, definitely check out our YouTube channel. It's P3 Podcast, and I highly recommend it. I actually find low power cubes very I find all cubes skill intensive, but I find low power to be one of the most skill intensive and some of the most craziest games that I've seen.
Low power is my favorite, just because. So in high power is made so that your deck is kind of contained in your line. Like you don't have to venture that far out, but low power really rewards you for finding the different pieces of different lines that kind of work together, or the trainers and supporters that benefit you the most. Whereas if you do that in high power, the advantage doesn't necessarily feel that significant, because even at a baseline, you're going to be taking knockouts pretty easily in high power. But in low power, you can really feel the advantage gained from those decisions and those picks, which is it makes the top decks much more complex, and I really like that about it.
Yeah, I agree, and I feel like so with high power, for me personally, I think a lot of it tests your ability to build a consistent deck. So you get a little bit too crazy and like you try to make too many ideas work. You kind of victimize your own game plan there. So you do have to like play a little bit more disciplinedly and like play a more straightforward way of playing, which is not always easy. And I think in the keyword we're going to look at today, I think it also is kind of one of those things where if you want to draft a very consistent straightforward deck, you have to draft a very consistent straightforward deck too. So I'm not saying there's not room for other like options and stuff, but like you can't be playing like 6/1/1 lines like
or like cube. I think multiple stage 2s would be really difficult to pull off.
Right, exactly. Kind of cube. Yeah, so I think it's like a different. I don't know if you call it a different skill set, but you have to definitely adjust your like mode of operations in a high power cube versus a low power cube.
For sure.
Speaking of, so we are going to be transitioning cubes to what is going to be our cube league, our next cube league cube, which is Vent's high power Gen 7 All Stars. So it's basically I've heard it said like a love letter essentially to the Sun and Moon era. So a lot of Sun and Moon influences. I think most, if not a high majority of the cards are all from the Sun and Moon on era. So you kind of see a lot of highlights from different eras. Also, it kind of gives life to some GXs that maybe didn't get enough spotlight. And we'll go into those later. But we did want to transition into this Crack-a-Pack. And Connor, what pack are we looking at here?
Yeah, so we have got a neat pack. We're going to go with 10 cards again. We liked that a lot last time. Kept it concise, but also interesting. But I have got a pack here with some very interesting considerations. So I will go through the cards and we'll talk about it. The first card is Silvally Gx with Gyro Unit, Turbo Drive, and Rebel GX, a card that we saw succeed in Standard in a couple of different ways. Cynthia and Caitlin, the supporter, Evolution Incense, Tate and Liza, Super Rod, Tapu Koko promo with Flying Flip, Professor Juniper, Weavile GX, Energy Retrieval, and Instruct Oranguru. So I'm not going to go through all the text on most of those cards just because I think most of the people listening to the podcast are at least fairly familiar with the cards in this cube. But lots to think about in this pack. There are lots of really powerful cards. Andrew, what are your first takes when you see this pack?
So it feels like I feel like a lot of people are going to be looking at our Juniper for one, because discard 7 draw. It's like one of the most powerful draw supporters in most recent times. So obviously, as we talked about, your goal is to build a very streamlined, consistent deck. You're going to want great supporters. So Juniper is probably a really high pick. You also have cards like Evolution's Incense. That's Search too. Again, played into that game plan of being able to grab Evolution Pokemon. So it's probably likely you're playing Evolution deck in cube. I mean, there's are good basics in this cube. So but I'm not really eyeing up either of those. In fact, I'm not eyeing up any of the trainers in this pack. I am going straight for the Silvally with Gyro Unit, as well as the Turbo Drive for 3 energies, 120 accelerate basic energy to the bench is really good. Acceleration in cube in general is great, and this is such a great attacker. Plus, you have the additional bonus of the Rebel GX, which if anyone's familiar with Lycanroc with Dangerous Rogue, doing 50 for each bench Pokemon, especially in a cube format where there's a lot more happening, it's more than likely people fill their bench, or even a bonus they had to play around it. So you threaten a lot with this card. Silvally has proven itself to be really strong line in this cube, especially from what I've seen in past drafts. And I think that benefits how I drafted this cube before. So I think Silvally offers a lot. And I think if getting into the card early allows you to influence your entire game plan, and you can build around Silvally. It's a very easy card to build around. So while I think the Juniper would be a very good card in any deck, I think the quality of my decks can be better if I'm playing it with Silvally. So that is my reason. I'm curious to see what you think about this spec.
Yeah, so the standout trainers to me are Juniper and Cynthia and Caitlyn. Cynthia and Caitlyn, of course, being a really powerful draw option. This cube has a high density of high power supporters, so you're pretty much always going to be able to get back something on the level of Cynthia, Juniper, Colress with your Cynthia Caitlyn. So card is very, very strong here. But I am looking at 3 cards outside of that, actually. So the 3 that I'm looking at are the Silvally GX, like you are, the Tapu Koko promo, and the Instruct Oranguru, which seems really odd because, such high power supporters. But the Instruct Oranguru allows you to play with some really neat stuff in this cube, like Magcargo. And it can allow you to play a really specific kind of strategy that is able to play its hand down and then draw into that. I just think it's a really powerful support effect in general, especially against cards like N and Reset Stamp, which are in really high counts in this cube. So Oranguru super powerful. Tapu Koko promo, not only is it a very versatile card with Flying Flip being able to spread 20s, there are some spread archetypes in this cube that would really love this card, and you could play it in really anything, and Flying Flip could be pretty strong. It can set up your knockouts, especially for some decks that might have an easy time getting the energy onto it, but maybe miss the knockout by a very small amount. Things like Blaziken, like Vikavolt, that could really take advantage of that extra damage to round out their 210, 220 damage attacks on some opposing stage 2s. So I think the Tapu Koko promo is really strong. And then, just like you, I love the Silvally GX here, and I think that would probably be my pick too. Actually, I would say I'm certain that would be my pick. So Gyro Unit as an ability, really strong. All your basics having free retreat. It can be useful even in an evolution deck in the early game. Can let you get out of whatever Pokemon you started with, no matter how heavy it is. Silvally fits into any type of deck. It accepts any form of acceleration really well, and its acceleration itself has a really nice versatile attack. Type Null actually has some very nice basics that you can get some early pressure on with. And Rebel Gx, probably one of the best, most versatile GX attacks in the cube. We've seen Silvally do well in this cube in the tests, and I would be pretty happy to have that in my deck as well. So I think that would be my pick out of everything. But I really wanted to highlight this pack just because it's the cards that I'm really looking at are up against such powerful trainers, and I think that's interesting, and we don't see very often where we might pick those cards instead.
So something interesting that I wanted to bring up here. This doesn't really influence the card I would pick, but it's something that is different. Considering this, I don't know. We would probably rank this at what, ultra high power with the GXs. Would you say that?
I would say it's high power for sure. Maybe ultra high power. So it's interesting because it has some really strong GXs, lots of one shots, but a lot of the cards that made the decks of the time period are not in here. Things like DCE, things like Zoroark GX, DNC Prism Star. There aren't very many strong energy. I think there are only one or two. Things like that that would really push this up a power level are excluded, and I think that's deliberate too. So it feels like a high power cube for sure, but I struggle to say that it treads into ultra high power just because the pace is brought down a little bit by the absence of a couple of those cards that would really push decks into, attacking for extreme damage on turn 2 every single time.
Yeah, definitely fair, and I agree for what it's worth. Kind of brings me to my next question. Then, when you're thinking about recovery in a high-powered cube like this, where definitely compared to low power, your turns you aren't going to get quite as many turns as you would in low power, just by nature of how the prices work. Does your approach to recovery drafting change because of the context of this cube?
So I would say supporter-based recovery is almost useless in a lot of games. If you have some cards like Roast Reveal Stalazzle, which is in this cube, then it can be nice because being able to shuffle a bunch of energy back into your deck and draw a bunch more cards off of those energy, being able to get more Pokemon back, and still being able to essentially draw 6 cards in a turn, even though you didn't play your supporter on drawing cards, that can be good. But in general, you really need your support, your recovery in general, whether it be energy, Pokemon, whatever, to be item based. And that can be Super Rod is not bad, but the immediate effects that put cards immediately back in your hand are much better. So things like Rescue Stretcher, Energy Retrieval, pretty much always going to be looking out for Rescue Stretcher as a top pick in a cube like this. I would be really happy to play a deck with 2 of them, and I'm going to take it at a really high pick rate, especially that first one. Second one I'll take a little bit lower, but I could definitely see myself taking a Rescue Stretcher over a really powerful trainer like some of the ones we see in this pack.
So let's just say if the Super Rod in this pack was a Rescue Stretcher, would that influence maybe your second pick in this pack? Assuming, well, maybe what? Would you take Rescue Stretcher over Silvally, or do you think Silvally's just something you're locked in for pack 1?
I would take Silvally for sure. Early on in the draft, I would take a Juniper. So at this point in the draft, I would take Silvally, I would take Juniper first, maybe a Rangaroo as well. And then I think I would look at the Rescue Stretcher. It's going to be more important later on, especially if you end up on a strategy that's going to need that recovery more than others. At this early point, I really don't even know what I'm doing. I don't know how badly my deck is going to need recovery, because you could end up in a very rare deck that doesn't. It would be a very, very good card to take here, and I wouldn't look at you funny if you did. But I think for me, the Silvally would still take it.
Yes, yeah, I actually appreciate you going through that thought process, because what's funny about drafting is you have so much limited information, and like you said, you don't know how much recovery your deck's going to need. So pack 1 pick winning the Rescue Stretcher, I mean, it's a super on this pack, but we're just playing that it's a Rescue Stretcher, could actually, I mean, it's not bad, right? But I think there might just be you open yourself up to more options and probably just a better overall strategy when you keep yourself open like that. So I definitely agree with that thought process for sure.
Yeah, I would not criticize anybody for taking a Rescue Stretcher out of this pack. But for me, it's going to be that Silvally. And I think anybody who's played this cube would probably at least be very strongly considering the Silvally as well.
Yeah, so I'm definitely interested to see what everyone else wants to take. So if you're watching on YouTube, please let us know what you would take in the comments. If you guys let us know. Last time it was really interesting to read. Definitely, I love seeing how people think through packs, or like what's important to them, or how their playstyle influences what they want to pick. So definitely no wrong answers. Just we just really want to know what interests you in this pack. And if this cube looks interesting to you, well, I have good news. We are going to be dissecting the main lines of this cube coming up in the next segment. So stick around. We'll be back with the whole lowdown on all the lines in this cube. So we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. So as we talked about before, the next cube league that we're doing is going to be this Gen 7 All-Stars cube. And what that means is basically encompassing a lot of the spirit of what the Sun Moon era had to offer. So you'll see a lot of Pokemon you probably recognize if you've played in the past few years. as well as maybe some more obscure Pokemon that probably didn't get to see that much play just due to certain format restrictions. So hopefully there's a lot of diversity, and maybe it's just kind of putting Sun and Moon in a different light. So we talked about this before, Connor. We're calling this more just like the higher end of high power, not ultra high, just like it's fairly high power because of the GXs.
Yeah, it's not like absolutely off the walls crazy, but it is definitely a very high power cube. Most high power cubes are not going to be able to compete with a lot of the cards in here, and a lot of the cards in here that are completely balanced would not be in almost any other settings. So definitely don't want to make that mistake.
So when we're thinking about like strategy in these kind of cubes, like what kind of decks are we looking for that are gonna that we think are probably gonna succeed? Like what kind of qualities do good decks have in this cube?
In large part, I would say the same kind of strategies that you see succeed in every power level. However, you are going to need to look for efficiency, speed, and consistency as your number one. So your acceleration needs to really come cheap. Your acceleration needs to come powerfully. Your attacks need to deal a lot of damage for what you give into them. You need to be as fast as possible. You really want to be attacking by turn 2 at the latest. Some of the slower stage 2 decks that can take one shots might be able to afford to go a little bit slower than that, but definitely not too much. I mean, games in a format like this are not going to go that long just by virtue of knockouts being very regular. So efficiency, speed, and consistency, those are your top 3. You don't need a lot of tricks in a cube like this. You just need to do something very, very well.
At that point too, you're also hoping that the cube's designed for each line to function that way too. So yeah, I definitely agree. A lot of it just comes down to drafting your idea and making it as streamlinable, consistent as possible. That should be fairly familiar to people that are playing in standard or expanded. Like it's kind of the same deck building philosophy that these formats are attributed to. So I guess without further ado, we can go into the cube lines themselves. So we can start right with the grass stage 2 line, which is my favorite line that I'll never get to play. It's the Decidueye Gx line. And it's not just Decidueye Gx. There are 3 copies of Decidueye Gx and then 2 copies of the most recent one to get printed with the Deep Forest camo. I know it's not exactly from all the Sun and Moon eras, but it is a Sun and Moon Pokemon, so it works out. And that one's interesting because it can't get hit by Vs and GXs, which is kind of a neat walling effect. Now, everyone's probably familiar, if you're familiar with Gen 7, with Feather Arrow Decidueye on Decidueye Gx, which is why I enjoy this line. I always enjoyed Decidueye decks when they were in standard, because like Feather Arrow allows you to manipulate damage. It allows you to it needs a partner in my opinion, but like it allows you to basically reach for certain knockouts and let you set up board states in your favor. My issue with this line though is that it's heavily contested. A lot of people love Decidueye as much as I do. So and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Connor, but I find this line to be kind of, I wouldn't say a trap, but it is, you're definitely getting in the middle of a mosh pit trying to draft a Decidueye in this cube.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't call it a trap by any means, because if you're able to put the deck together, it's going to be great. But people, and I wouldn't even say that it's like one of the strongest lines in the cube. It's not bad by any means. I think we're at the point where none of the lines in the cube are bad anymore, but I wouldn't put it in my top 3 for sure. And people just have that attachment to Decidueye. They really like Decidueye. I will say Decidueye Gx might be one of the only stage 2s that's actually worth putting into your deck that is not like part of your main line. It's just a tech stage 2. Very rarely worth it in high power, but Decidueye Gx might just be. However, in general, just do not think that you are going to have an easy time putting together a really solid Decidueye Gx deck, because people so far in the tests have really, really loved this line and just taken pieces of it and picked it apart. I think we saw 1 or 2 decks in the last test, but they had to pick the Decidueye so highly that they ended up with pretty shaky trainer lines in the end. So really, really tough situation, and I feel like you're never really safe to say that it's totally open, because somebody later on could just pick up a Decidueye Gx to pad out some damage, and then you're in a tough spot.
Yeah, with only 3 options for Feather Arrow, you are limited to see. Even if you saw a Decidueye Pack 1, it's going to really depend on really the first 2 packs of your other passing players, because that card is going to be a standout pick in pretty much any pack, even after the good cards are starting to get taken. I wouldn't expect to see it like by the 8th person in the pack, passing it to me. Like, so you do have to get pretty lucky to get all of the Decidueyes, even to get probably 2 of them. But that said, if it works out and you are able to get the line, I do think it pairs well with a lot of lines in this cube, and you definitely aren't sad about that. Um, Something about Deep Forest Camo. We haven't really seen wall strats really come out in this cube. Do you see any potentials for those, Connor, in this sort of style?
Yeah, I think Deep Forest Camo has a lot of potential actually, and the reason is that in addition to Deep Forest Camo being highly effective against a lot of the major attackers in this cube, Splitting Arrow is just a good attack. I mean, Grass Colorless for 90, Snipe 20 on 2 Pokemon, 140 HP is not great. You definitely like to be up at that 160 plus mark, but for what it is, Splitting Arrow is a solid attack, synergizes really well with the GX. Deep Forest Camo is going to put a lot of decks in a strange situation as far as having to use suboptimal attackers to get through it, so I do like the card quite a bit in here.
Yeah, I agree. It's just an interesting card because, I mean, honestly, safeguard effects isn't something that typically comes up that often in like normal cubes, just because outside of maybe Mewtwo level X, there's not a lot of effects you can really go off of to make it work. So definitely curious to see how that pans out in this cube. So then I guess we should move on to the stage 1 grass, which is Lorantis Gx. Another really, it was pretty good when it first came out. It wasn't like, you know, meta defining, but Lorantis has a lot of good qualities. It's actually one of my, I think one of my lines I look at, and I definitely see a lot of options for it. It has Floral Supply, doing 40 for 1 grass, but it accelerates 2 grass energies, or 2 basic energies, rather, which is even better. And if you remember when we were talking about the Crack-a-Pack, acceleration in this type of cube is great. So being able to Flower Supply and set up pretty much any Pokemon that you want, including itself, pairs really nicely with the rest of the lines in the cube. Solar Blade, doing 120 and then being able to heal 30, does a pretty like modest amount of healing as well as like some solid damage output. And I really enjoy the GX, the Chloral Scythe GX. It's kind of a mouthful. You do 50 damage for each grass energy attached to this Pokemon. So assuming you're using Solar Blade with 3 grass, 1 more grass, you're hitting about 200. Not to mention, it also has the Promo Lorantis, which boosts grass and fire damage by 20. So it's really easy to power up this Lorantis and get it swinging for higher numbers. It also really pairs well with other typing, especially fire. You can play with this to sort of diversify your cube lines, but
yeah, I think Lorantis is great. I really love Flower Supply. I think it has so much potential with just the different decks in the cube. You know, tons of types are going to love acceleration, and Lorantis is a super efficient and really nice and powerful way to do that. There are a lot of cards that get other cards into the discard in this cube because there are a lot of synergies with the discard, so Flower Supply is going to be a pretty reliable attack. And Chloropsite GX was not an amazing GX attack. It was not a bad one in Standard, but I think in a format like Cube, it can really shine. 3 for 150 is not bad. 4 for 200 is not something that you're going to do very often, but when you do, you're always going to be presenting that damage. Like, that's always going to be something that you have on the table. If you have a 3 energy Lorantis, your opponent's going to have to play around that 200 damage, and in Cube, that can be really difficult. So I'm a big fan of Lorantis. The Sunny Day Lorantis, super versatile, really useful in a lot of fire and grass decks. We could see it in fire basics and grass basics, Stalazzle. I could even see it in Decidueye. Probably wouldn't see it in Blaziken. I'd be pretty surprised there because Blaziken's kind of got its own engine, but maybe a 1-1 to help round out the numbers on the GX's attack for 210. But Grass also has a lot of really nice basics in like Tapu Bulu, Heracross, Maractus, Pheromosa. So tons of really nice options to take advantage of Sunny Day, and I am a fan. There's also Golisopod. It's the water stage one in this cube, but there are 2 grass ones in the line, so another thing that can really take advantage of it. I'm just a big fan. I love Lorantis, and I would love to see it do well in the upcoming league.
fair enough. So I guess like since we're talking about water, let's move into the water type. So moving into our water stage 2 line, we are looking at Empoleon. So what that line consists of is 2 of the Dive Draw, which is sort of like a Zoroark ability. Discard a card, draw 2. Pretty good for drawing effects. Its attack is sort of, I would kind of, I mean, it's 1 energy, which is nice, but it's sort of lackluster. You're not, I mean, the full bench you're doing 10 for each Pokemon in play. So you do have a damage cap of about 120, which is not bad per se, but I think the other ones are a lot better as far as attacking goes. Diving Draw is an insane ability nonetheless. We have the Forbidden Light or Ultra Prism. Sorry, the Ultra Prism Empoleon with Total Command, which is probably one of the best Empoleons in the whole line. For 2 energies, you're doing 20 for each Pokemon on both bench sides. So assuming you fill your bench, it's a guaranteed 100. And then if your opponent fills their bench, you're hitting up to 200, 230 with the Choice Band. It can one-shot a lot of powerful Pokemon in this queue for only giving up a single prize over 2 energies. So we talked about efficiency. That's very important. I also think playing a single prize attacker like this is going to give you more turns. You're forcing your opponent to take 6 prizes, which can be very detrimental with cards like N. You can definitely slow them down and force them to burn resources. So Empoleon kind of puts an interesting pressure on your opponent. And then the last one that I haven't talked about is the most recent Empoleon to get print. I think it's from Cosmic Eclipse. It has for 1 energy Recall, which copies the any of its evolving Pokemon. So there's a Piplup in this cube. I think they're all Bubble Hold. So it's the one from the set that it was printed in with 80 damage, and the Pokemon's basic can attack. So it could be good at stalling some basics. Between 1 for 80, not too bad. And then you also have you have 2 Piplups, and it's kind of funny how this is laid out. So you have the one from Cosmic Eclipse that does direct dive. So you discard all energies attached to this Pokemon, and you can do 100 to the bench. So that's really good for pressuring even just evolving basics. So while you might not be able to hit type Null per se, but you could for a knockout you can hit pretty much a lot of the stage 2 basics, quite a few amounts of the stage 1 basics. You can even set up for a huge knockout later, and you only having to play 1 energy to use that attack. Can be pretty decent. The other Piplup, I don't remember what set it is because it's from a very old set. I think it might have been one of the original Diamond Pearl sets. And it has
Majestic Dawn.
Majestic Dawn. It has a lot of spread attacks, which can be good for a number of reasons. So you have Ice Blade, which does 30 to one of your opponent's Pokemon, and then you have Washover, which is 50 plus 10 to 2. So I think you're using this attack mostly to set up damage on for future attacks, which could make your life as a Empoleon player easier because you are reaching for about 200, which can be a little bit outside of the range of what you need for some of these bigger Pokemon. So I feel like you can use this Recall Empoleon to sort of manipulate the damage in your favor. Connor, what do you think about Empoleon, specifically Total Command?
I think Empoleon is very efficient, which I like a lot. The highest energy cost in the entire line is 2. Oh, I suppose you could use the 3 energy attack with Total Command Empoleon, but I can't imagine a situation where you'd ever do that. So you pretty much cap out at a 2 energy attack cost, which is great. Total Command, really nasty attack for 2 energy. Even if you just have a full bench yourself, it's 2 for 100. In this cube, your opponent is going to be able to play around it reasonably, so a lot of the time it is going to miss that 1-hit knockout, but it's something that your opponent does have to play around if they don't want to risk that. In addition, Diving Draw, super powerful ability. Attack Command is not, the end-all be-all best attack in this cube. However, 1 for 100 or 1 for 120 is really nice. And the Recall attack on the Empoleon from the newer set can be a 100 damage snipe with one of the Prinplups, which is really nice on some of the more setup-oriented decks, and even just in general. The big problem that we've seen with Empoleon is just that it is slow. It's not super fast. You are really incentivized to evolve up one at a time in a lot of cases because of Recall. Now, in this iteration of the cube, Recall has taken a back seat, so now maybe we can see some more rare candy come in. We can see the deck really speed up, and I could see it actually being a little bit too strong, given the changes that we've recommended, but not necessarily. I'm really looking forward to seeing how it does tomorrow. It's going to be our last test as of the time of recording this, so it could be changed a little bit before then, but it just seems like a really strong line. Only thing is, you're just going to have to set up a bunch of stage 2s, and your HP is not amazing. You come in at 160 on your higher HP ones, which definitely not bad, but 140 in this cube is not too difficult to deal with, and that's where your Dark Explorers and Empoleon is sitting, so going to be something that you have to cope with, and I'm really excited to see how the new line shakes out. The Total Command Empoleon is new, and it's coming into the cube after Empoleon showed some lackluster results, so really excited to see how it does moving forward.
So it's interesting that you brought up the slowness of the deck. Kind of a general cube building question then that it brings me is how much, if you're trying to play a stage 2 deck in this cube, like how much are you prioritizing rare candy in your strategy?
Yeah, so normally, Rare Candy is one of my most hated cards in Cube. It's not to the point where I will just not take it, but it's a card that I think people overrate really highly, and I think Cube builders overrate it really highly too. However, in a high power cube like this one, where speed is absolutely critical, I'm going to try to be jamming as many Rare Candies as I possibly can, because the advantage that you gain from that Rare Candy is there, and it's very tangible. You know, you have a lot of 1 energy, 2 energy attacks on the lines in this cube and on the Empoleons in this cube. So that Rare Candy is going to be really fantastic to get you there. Getting into Diving Draw, being able to draw more cards as fast as possible, also really nice. It's also going to allow you to find those Empoleons more easily. So I would really highly prioritize Rare Candy if you are going for a stage 2 line in this cube.
Yeah, well said. I mean, that's something I noticed by drafting this cube a few times is that the quality that Rare Candy has in this cube specifically is very different than even maybe the last cube that we just drafted, the more low power cube, and it's something that is kind of, I think, I don't know, it makes you think more when you're switching between power levels so abruptly. Is that okay? At one moment, Rare Candy is not that great. Now Rare Candy is amazing. You have to be able to like switch the context. It's kind of interesting characteristic about Cube League, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm kind of excited to see like what people come up with, and hopefully if drafting this cube, which you all should, definitely don't rule out Rare Candy. And then when you're trying to draft these stage 2 strategies, because they can help you keep pace. So enough about that. Let's move on to the stage 1 line, which you already introduced before, and it's the Golisopod line. It is split between 2 waters and 2 grass. The grass one, it's one of the most recent ones that was printed, has that hard time slash. So 30 base, and then just 50 damage for each GX or V Pokemon in play. Primarily focused with GX. I don't think there's any Vs in this cube, which is great for. I mean, it's basically forcing your opponent to have to play around that attack, and you're probably guaranteed to have probably 1 GX in play, if not more. So 80 is fine. There's a bunch of twin energies in the cube, so it's really easy to set this one up. I wouldn't be surprised if you're actually hitting for like 130 base, because I'm sure 2 GXs is pretty much inevitable in a lot of these strategies. And if not, you're forcing them to not be able to set up some Pokemon, which can be very detrimental to like an end. I think this card's great. I think Smash Turn could also be pretty good, as well as being able to retreat your Golisopod into the bench. So 70 switch to the bench can give you some longevity. It can set up some damage for later. And then there's the water one, which is probably one maybe people are less familiar with, because it hasn't really seen a lot of play. Granted, the other Ghost Pod doesn't see much play either in standard, but it has the ability Emergency Exit. So if this Pokemon has 2 or fewer energies attached to it, it has no retreat costs, which base retreat cost is 4. So it's pretty great that it can retract for free. It has a low retreat cost, but with its attack cost is pretty heavy. It's a water triple colorless, does 120, and if this Pokemon has worked its way into the active, it does 60 more. So with cards like Triple XL, you're looking at 2 attachments for what could be like 180, which is significant. It can take knockouts on stuff like Tapu Lele. It could, with the Choice Band, take a knockout on most, if not all, of the stage 1 lines GXs, which is pretty significant. It's just really good damage. I think even if you're able to set this one up manually, it's just a great attacker. Having the ability to play Triple XL and then giving it free retreat on the next turn, I think is fairly strong. The type coverage is also really nice because you are weak to water. Or not weak to water, you're weak to grass, but the other one's weak to fire. So you can diversify your weaknesses with this card. Connor, you said you're a fan of Golisopod. What do you like about this line?
Yeah, I really love both of the Pokemon in this line, actually. I think that the hard time slash Golisopod. So I will say, for starters, the stats on both of them really nice. 130, 140 HP on a stage 1 non-GX Pokemon is really nice. It's going to be hard to deal with, especially in the first couple of turns of the game. But hard time slash, 2 colorless, 30 plus 50 for each GX your opponent has in play. That just has so much potential. Sometimes your opponent has to play into it if they need a Lele, if they need a Dedenne, things like that. Sometimes your opponent might walk into it anyway if they're playing a more GX heavy strategy. So lots of potential for Golisopod with hard time slash to go off. And I also really like it because you don't even have to play grass energy for it to end up in your deck. I really love just a lot of different aspects about the card and how you can kind of make it scary. I also really love the emergency exit Golisopod. First impression is just such a devastating attack. If it was on the bench and became your active, deals 60 more damage. That is just such a huge attack, and so it does cost 4 energy, which is a lot, but it is it's applicable with any color of acceleration. You just need 1 water energy. So you can use things like Malamar, you can use Quagsire, you can use Weavile, or Weavile GX, you can use Lorantis. I mean, there are so many different ways to get energy onto this Golisopod, and it can be so powerful in a lot of decks. So I am a huge fan of this line. I would not be surprised to see it do well at all going forward in this cube, and I'm definitely going to be looking out for the pieces myself to see if, my deck is going to allow for those energy to come into play.
Yeah, I would definitely like to see a Golisopod deck work its way into the top 8, so definitely keep an eye out for that line. Moving right along, let's go into Fire. The Fire Stage 2 is Blaziken. So it starts off with the 2 Blaziken GXs from Celestial Storm. That's it. It's basically, it's kind of like a beat fire speed stick. So for 3 fires, you have Explosive Kick, which is 210, Scrying 2 fire. It works a lot with the line because the other two as 3 copies of Firestarter. So Firestarter is basically like Malamar with a fire type. That lets you accelerate a fire energy from your discard to one of your bench, which obviously is going to be really strong, especially if you're able to streamline certain Blaze Kicks attacks. The attack itself for Fire Stream is 98 plus 20, and you discard a fire, you can do 20 damage to each of the bench Pokemon. It can be a really efficient spread if you're trying to set up maybe some knockouts for the Blaze Kick to come up with. It's also just a great one prizer to maybe threaten a 2-shot with that card. And the fire acceleration, I think, is what makes this line fairly strong. You definitely want to have a lot of that mobility, a lot of that, like we said, consistency and streamline power. But I don't know if I like it more than the Stage 1 line. Connor, what are your thoughts on Blaziken?
I think it's a tough call. In a perfect world, if you can get your Blaziken set up pretty fast, or if you can get an early welder and then kind of set them up as you go, then this line can be amazing. I mean, Explosive Kick, 3 fire colorless for 210, even with that 2 energy discard downside, that is such a powerful attack, and it's going to one-shot, I think, every single Stage 1 GX in the cube. If you have things like a Choice Band, then you're going to be able to one-shot, I think, every GX in the cube. I don't think there's anything that survives it. So Explosive Kick is just an incredibly powerful attack that cannot be understated. However, if your setup falters, if you set up slowly, if your opponent sets up very quickly, then you are going to have a really, really tough time, I think. Because, if you are not able to leverage these Explosive Kicks for one-hit knockouts, then it's going to be tough. And if you're not able to recycle them turn after turn for one-hit knockouts, it's going to be tough. Additionally, I could see Blaziken really struggling with decks that are able to produce many single prizers, just because you've got 2 GXs, it's not a ton, and an Explosive Kick is really at its best when it's one-shotting GX Pokemon. When it's only hitting non-GX Pokemon, especially low-commitment ones, it's going to really struggle. And I could see this deck having a hard time against things like Empoleon, Golisopod, interestingly enough. Just a couple of the lines in the cube that we've already talked about. But in general, I think Blaziken's core strategy is great. Just the idea, very straightforward, very simple, however, super high damage, and it's really, really easy to get it off turn after turn.
Yeah, I also don't find Blaziken to be much of a contested line. That's not saying people don't draft it, but it is. A comparison to lines like Decidueye, I think Blaziken, you have a lot easier time getting into the Blaziken line than you would lines like Decidueye or maybe Silvally, which we'll talk about later. So I think that is definitely a plus side to this. It is an easier strategy to pull off getting the line together.
Yeah, the Blaziken lines are not techable. If you're looking for a Pokemon that accelerates energy to the bench, you're gonna go for something like Malamar. And if you're going for a high damage attacker, Blaziken EX is going to be hard to pull off without that Fire Excel. So most of the time, if you are on Blaziken GX, you are going to be on the whole line, and you're not going to be fought too much for it. So could be a really nice way to get a solid 8 out of 10 deck in the Cube League, and 8 out of 10 deck makes top 8 all the time. 8 out of 10 deck even wins the event sometimes if you get the right matchups. So definitely something to keep in mind. Also interesting to say is that the Stalazzle, that is the stage 1 line, which I think is more versatile, we're going to get into that shortly, but does pair with the line very well, both in the draw sense and in the sense that you can have a slightly more versatile attacker. So there are a couple of things going for Blaziken that might not be obvious, and I think that we could definitely see a really strong Blaziken deck come out of the draft on Saturday.
Yeah, so let's move right into Stalazzle, which I'm actually a huge fan of the Stalazzle Gx that's in the cube. So for 2 fire energies, you can use a Diabolical Claw. It does 50 damage for each prize card you've taken. So when you get to the end of the game and you've taken 4 prizes, Stalazzle's doing 200 damage, which is nuts. And if you compare that with maybe something like a Choice Band or even just like some extra damage spread for maybe the other Blazekins, like you're going to be doing a huge amount of damage to whatever's going in your way. Heat Blast for 2 fires for 110 is pretty moderate damage. 2 for 110 is pretty decent. It is like a big GX card, so it's not necessarily always going to be one shot right away. So you do have that advantage. I don't particularly know if the GX attack is always going to be useful, but Queen Haze discards all energy attached to your opponent's active. But I can definitely see games where your Queen Haze comes off and you're able to like slow your opponent down enough with that to basically take a knockout. I think what this card is great because it's very versatile, like Connor said. Talk about Blaziken. You can pair it with a lot of different stuff. It pairs very nicely with the Blaziken line, obviously because the acceleration, and then Blaze Kick can help you get a few extra prizes early. Then when your Blaziken starts to go down, you have Diabolical Claws, potentially picking up the slack. It could pair well with cards like Lorantis, which is very effective attackers to set this up, and you have covered weakness. And then also the other part of this line is that you have the Roast Reveal Stalazzle. So much like its Ninetales counterpart, Roast Reveal lets you discard a fire energy from your hand and draw 3. So in decks like, I don't know, Blaziken, where you want to accelerate fire energy, you could have this built-in draw engine. It also pairs really nicely with cards like Machamp. So if you smooth over a card on top, you can Roast Reveal, draw the card back on top. And I also think discarding your fire energies and pairing them with cards like Fire Crystal or Energy Retrieval gives you immediate access to those energies later. So you can basically turn your fire energy into 3 cards and then get them back in your hand later. It also rewards you for playing a lot of fire energy in your deck, which you might need to set up big attacks. So what this line has is a really nice GX attacker as well as some consistencies. Connor, what are your thoughts on Stalazzle?
I love Stalazzle. I think the line is so good. I think it's so cool. In the last test that I did, I built a Stalazzle fighting deck with Lycanroc Gx, with Buzzwole Gx, with Sledgehammer Buzzwole, just really low to the ground, really aggressive. I had a lot of hand disruption effects to essentially just leverage a powerful early start and then finish the game with Diabolical Claws. And also Lycanroc's GX attack, but we'll get to that again. We'll get to that later. But the reason why I built the deck the way I did not only was to diversify weakness and because I think Stalazzle Gx is such a great card, but because it could take advantage of Roast Reveal, which is the other Stalazzle in the cube. So it's a 2-2 split. The ability to just discard a fire, draw 3 cards is so incredibly powerful. It really extends your reach. It extends your ability to dig into your deck. It's going to smooth out your draws in general. It gives you incredible resilience to hand disruption. So many ways that so many reasons to play Roast Reveal in a deck. And honestly, if I see Roast Reveal Stalazzle early enough in a draft, I will take it and then I'll play heavy fire energy in a non-fire deck. And that's actually what I did in the cube that we ran over the weekend. Is I saw like a pack 1 or pack 2 Buzzwole GX. I took it. I really wanted to just optimize my deck around aggressive starts. And then I started to see the Stalazzles go around. I'm like, wow, Stalazzle GX has some really efficient attacks, and Roast Reveal would allow an aggressive deck to stay so potent, and it would also allow it to take advantage of some really nasty disruptive cards. So that's what I did, and I actually was able to win the test using that strategy. So I think it could be really powerful moving forward. Just in general, I love the line. There's so many different ways that I can see this line going into decks. I could see it being played with Lorantis. I could see it being played with Fighting. Probably not Raichu. Probably not Empoleon. Actually, I maybe could see it with Empoleon as well, just because it's even more draw, but I think it's a little bit of a stretch. Golisopod, I think, is a great partner. Just so many different ways that I can see this line being played, and I would not be surprised to see it in any of them.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Roast Reveal as well. I think it just, and the combination of GX as well, it just a lot this line offers. It definitely benefits the cube in different ways. And the Roast Reveal engine could be really solid. It's just a nice draw. Moving right along, probably one of the most, I don't know what you'd call it. It's been sort of shifted around as far as what cards are in the line, but Vikavolt Gx has been sort of the I don't know if it's a villain, but it's definitely been sort of people have been kind of afraid of it, right?
Yeah, it's been tough. It's definitely been the most threatening stage 2 line in the cube for a while. I think where it is right now, it's a little bit more tame. So it's a 2 of Vikavolt GX and a 3 of Vikavolt SM10 with Stealthy Body and Electric Cannon. But a really, really important feature of the line, it wouldn't be the same line without it, is 3 of Battery Charge-a-Bug, that allow you to get 2 Lightning Energy in play for free without taking your attachment, as long as you have Vikavolt, these to attach it to. So Electric Cannon can be really scary because it's 120 damage with an optional 100 damage boost that you can, of course, discard Charge Bugs to get into. Stealthy Body, Stadium in play, no weakness. That's an amazing, amazing ability. Cannot be overstated in high power. Weakness is such a huge thing, and being able to prevent it is amazing. It's just not as feasible to diversify the types in your decks, especially in a stage 2 deck like this one. And the ability to remove weaknesses just built into your stage 2 is amazing. Vikavolt GX, I actually like a fair bit. Super Zap Cannon, 180 Lightning, colorless, colorless, colorless. Discard 2 energy, not a huge downside, really easy to pay forward. Charge Bug, 240 HP is great. And I like the first attack too. Single Lightning Energy, Charge Beam 50, attach an energy from the discard to that Pokemon. I would really like it if Charge Beam attached to other Pokemon, but in general, I like it a lot. And Gigatron GX can clean up any knockouts that you might have missed by just a little bit. Deal 60 to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Theoretically, if you could get it off on like turn 2 against a deck with smaller basics, then you could just put yourself in an incredible position. But I think generally the usage for it is going to be to pick up knockouts that you might have missed early on, or set up knockouts that you are looking for later in the game. So the line, I think, is still super powerful. It's down from 4 Charger Bug to 3, so you got to work for it a little bit more. You really, really value that recovery. I think it's going to be number 1 in this deck, is just making sure you have as much Pokemon recovery as possible. I'm talking like 3 cards between Super Rod and Rescue Stretcher. So that is a big consideration, but you have the potential for some absolutely explosive starts, and you can just deal so much damage so fast, and some decks are going to really struggle to keep up with that. So I think Vikavolt's biggest issue, its biggest enemy, is going to be single prizers. Vikavolt is not built to knock out single prizers turn after turn. The GX is pretty good at it, actually, but things like Empoleon, things like Machamp, I could see giving it a pretty significant issue. So interesting to see how this goes. I think the line is in a much better place as far as balance than it was before. However, I think it's still really strong, and I'm excited to see what people do with it in the test and in the league.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see the iterations that this line has taken, because I mean, like, the cubes that we use for Cube League are obviously tested, and the admins have a lot of input onto making sure that these lines are all balanced and fair. And Vikavolt has definitely had its fair share of broken possibilities, but I do like this more refined version of it. I agree with all the changes that have been made. I really like the Stealthy Body of Vikavolt, the 1 prizer with has no weakness, and the Electro Cannon at a heavy cost. You are taking a huge knockout. And I think with the 3 battery, the line is still able to do what it was doing before, except now you do, like Connor said, have to work a little bit harder to draft it, but it makes it that much more rewarding to play. I think if you're able to streamline the deck, you are in a very good spot and probably on your way to making top 8. So I would look out for Vikavolt as being a top contender as far as stage 2s go. It has a lot that it can throw at you, so definitely be on the lookout for this card. The next line in this in the Lightning is going to be that Raichu. So it is very it kind of throws in a similar vein of Vikavolt, but it's still pretty different, I would say. It uses 2 of the Raichu GXs with a powerful spark. Attack, it does 20 plus 20 for 20 damage times the amount of light energy attached to all of your Pokemon. So if you're able to spread a bunch of energy into play, which it has the tools to do that, you can definitely get a huge knockouts back to back. Its other attacks are a little bit less relevant, but potentially could get you out of a bind. The Thunder for 160 for 3, doing 30 to itself is not really ideal. You are putting yourself at a pretty good range for a retaliation knockout. Hopefully you're taking a very valuable prize with that. And then you have the Voltail GX that is leaving your opponent paralyzed. Now that I could actually see coming up if, in fact, your opponent doesn't play a heavy amount of switch, and maybe you combo with like an N. Voltail could get you maybe a 2-shot knockout to retaliate with its Power Spark. So I think you have some options with this card. And then you have the 1 prizers in this. It's a 2-2 split. between the GX and the Nuzzle Raichu. And why it's relevant with Nuzzle is because all the Pikachus also have Nuzzle, and the engine is sort of set up to use Snuggly Generator Pachirisu, which for 1 energy on the Pachirisu accelerates an energy card to each Pokemon with Nuzzle. So you can use it on your Pikachus, you can use it on the Raichus with Nuzzle, and get a bunch of energy in play. And that's relevant because if its second attack for 1 lightning energy, you're using Powerful Spark, which is basically like Raichu. It does 20 times the amount of lightning energy attached to all your Pokemon. So you can see the theme and synergies here. This deck is interesting. I have seen it built quite a few times in these test drafts, and I think they've done fairly well. And I think the thing with it is that you have to be able to keep energy in play and utilize your attackers effectively. What kind of results have we seen in these test drafts with Raichu?
So bumping up the Pachirisu to a higher count right now it's at 2 of, has really changed the deck and made it into a Nuzzle acceleration and then finish the game as quickly as possible afterward kind of deck. Right now, I think it's actually it has potential to be weakened. Not maybe incredibly, but a little bit. Just because in the last test it did go 3-0 and 2-1 in 2 side-by-side pods, so really scary deck. Fighting has much more of a presence than it did in those cubes though, so I could definitely see it being vulnerable to that. The overall speed of the cube has also come up with some more item-based search, so I can see that being an issue. The big thing with Raichu is if the opponent is able to disrupt that early Pachirisu acceleration before it really turns into anything significant, then it is going to be hard for that Raichu player to finish out the game. You know, even losing a couple of 2 energy Raichus can make it so that finishing out the game is going to be really difficult. You know, you're going to be maybe swinging for 120-ish, and that's not going to be getting you there. So especially against decks that are able to disrupt you in that early game and either have huge HP Pokemon to weather the storm in the mid game, or Pokemon that are very capable of one-shotting the GX, there are going to be a lot of options. Again, Raichu is another deck where I think that single prizers could present a fairly significant issue. Raichu with Powerful Storm, the non-GX, is very easy to knock out. It has 120 HP. That's essentially nothing in a cube like this. Most competent attackers are going to be able to deal that damage. So if your opponent is able to either survive the Powerful Storm or just, feed it 1 prize and then take 1 prize back, then ultimately Raichu is not in a favorable exchange there. It really benefits from taking knockouts on GXs. So I'm going to be really interested to see how Raichu does in the upcoming test. And I could definitely see it being nerfed, just because if your opponent is not able to disrupt that Pachirisu, and that's not a rare occurrence, then you just get 10 energy in play in a few turns, and you're almost unstoppable.
Yeah, definitely fair statements all around. So interested to see what becomes of Raichu. If you are interested in seeing the updated list for this cube, by the way, if you're interested in drafting, the links will always be in the description. If you're watching on YouTube, it also will be included on the Spotify. So if you want to see what we're looking at, and it's probably an updated version by this point, go ahead and check that out. So moving right along, we go right into Psychic. Psychic is a little bit different. There is no Stage 2 Psychic in this cube. Sadly, there wasn't really one that really jived well with this kind of style. So, and for going that, there's actually quite a few other things in this cube for Psychic. So, we kind of talked about it before. Malamar is a huge presence in this cube at a 6-4 line, and most people should probably be familiar with Malamar. That Psychic recharge ability, allowing you to attach a Psychic energy from your discard pile to one of your bench. Very popular card. I saw a ton of play. Definitely, I'm sure when people think Sun and Moon, they're going to think Malamar. So it makes sense why it's in here. But it's paired with a lot of different basics. Connor, I'm curious, what do you think of the sort of Malamar box kind of style here that he has?
I'm a fan. I think it's a nice, aggressive, low to the ground deck. You're going to have a lot of attackers that are really powerful with it, but it's not without its vulnerabilities. Decks that either have more HP than it's capable of knocking out, things with like Stage 2 GXs that Malamar has no real way to deal with efficiently, are potentially going to make it struggle. In addition, Psychic type Pokemon, so like Naganodel Gx, being able to one-shot a Mewtwo GX, for example, could be a big problem. However, at the end of the day, it's very close to what Malamar was in Standard. It's just a thick Malamar line. It's powerful basic Psychic Pokemon, and it's a really streamlined, low to the ground, aggressive strategy. And those are often the strategies that we see doing well in high power. So I would not be surprised to see Malamar do very, very well in the event. Malamar as an accelerator is also very versatile with any of the attackers that we've talked about that can take colorless energy attack costs. So definitely be on the lookout for exactly how you might be able to turn that acceleration into action, and how you might be able to use that to fuel some of your colorless attack costs in other lines. Because I think there are a lot of ways in this cube that can be done, and I would not be surprised to see that succeed.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's one nice thing that Malware brings to the table, especially in a cube setting, is that it pairs well with anything that just takes colorless costs, because it's always going to appreciate that type of energy. It's any energy excel, and it's so efficient. It's so easy to search out. They're pretty safe on the bench. I mean, I guess something's worth noting in this cube, everyone is granted one free Guzma, but like even that's not going to be enough to just disrupt the entire engine. So if you can build a very streamlined Malamar deck or even a Malamar engine deck, I think you're off to a good start there. So in addition to that, we do have Naganodel Gx as a sort of a pseudo psychic stage one, and I only say that because there's only 2 psychic Naganodels. The other 2 are the Venom shot, but the first one, the psychic one, we're looking at is Beast Raid. So somebody familiar with the idea. Beast Box, basically what Beast Raid does, it does 20 damage for each Ultra Beast in play. Each of your Ultra Beasts in play. So there's a lot of different ones in the play. You have Kartana, you have Stakataka, which will reduce damage to Ultra Beast, Celesteela, Nihilego, Buzzwole. I think we said Pheromosa before. So you have a lot of different Ultra Beasts you can pair with it. Not to mention that the Poipoles also count. So for 1 energy, for 120, I think it's very efficient. Could be very strong in that sense. It also has the Stinger GX, which was more of used in like a checkmate style of deck where you would set the game up to basically win the game after using Stinger. I don't think those strategies really come into play in this type of queue without those type of without like Giratina or like Dugong, but definitely people are welcome to try. I would love to see a checkmate deck make top 8, but alas, I don't quite know if that is going to happen. But Beast Raid nonetheless is very strong, and of course it has the Ultra Conversion Naganodel, which I'm sure a lot more people are familiar with. Its ability allows you to discard an Ultra Beast from your hand and then draw 3, so it could be pretty efficient draw, especially if you have cards like Ultra Space, which might be pretty easy to find if you're playing Ultra Beast deck. It has another tackle Venom Shot for a psychic triple colorless, 170. You discard 2 energies, and then you do 170 to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So that can be really good if you play like a triple Excel. You could attach a psychic to this Naganodel. All right, triple Excel, discard, maybe knock out Dedenne, knock out Lele. So it could be a good cleanup card. Could be a good way to set up knockout on another Pokemon. But really, I think this card is great for the draw. And then it's worth mentioning the Injection GX allows you to put a card from your opponent's discard pile into the prizes. So I think that card can be pretty sneaky, especially if your opponent has some valuable resources that you would like to get rid of. You could just Injection GX and Lost on it for them. I don't know how often it actually would come up, but something that is worth noting. I haven't exactly seen a lot of people play Beast Box. Have you seen this deck come up a lot in testing?
I haven't seen this deck come up a lot in testing, but I do think it has a ton of potential. There are a lot of powerful Ultra Beasts in this cube, and Naganodel GX being able to just turn to 1 for 120 or 1 for 100, that is a lot of damage, and it's very fast. And then you don't really have to commit any more energy to that. You can throw your energy elsewhere. You can start developing other attackers. You can really use any color of energy you want as long as you're playing Ultra Beasts. So I think lots of potential. I think it's just people have not really tried to put the deck together that much. I haven't even really seen any attempts at it in the tests that I've been watching, but I definitely think it's something to watch out for, and definitely a powerful line as well. Having Ultra Conversion for the extra draw, having Beast Raid for the super aggressive pressure. I could even see Stinger GX coming up in certain games where maybe your opponent gets off to a very strong start, or they're a deck that burns through a lot of resources very quickly. Then they take an early lead. Maybe they're up 2-5 or something to that effect. Stinger GX is such a powerful attack in a situation like that. And a big problem with Naganodel GX in Standard when it was legal is that using Stinger GX would very often result in your opponent being ahead on the prize trade in the end because, your Naganodel is vulnerable. But in a format like this, I think Stinger has a lot more utility because Naganodel GX is, one, not necessarily that likely to go down. You're not going to use Stinger GX in the matchups where they're just going to immediately turn around and one-shot your Naganodel. But two, that damage is a lot harder to reach in general. And I think that Stinger could be used very effectively, especially against decks that use up resources maybe like Vikavolt that would give you an otherwise very difficult time. Vikavolt one-shotting all your stuff pretty cleanly. You don't have a ton of great ways to deal with it, but then hit it with a stinger after they've used up a bunch of charger bugs and see what they are able to do, because I think a lot of the time you might be able to come out ahead on that situation. So very interesting elements in this Beast Box deck. They're Pokemon from all over the place. It would be too hard to talk about all of them, but it is very powerful, and I think that people should definitely keep an eye on it. I think it's probably going to be one of the least popular archetypes in the cube, but its pieces kind of get picked at by other lines, so might see it not come together just because it's a little bit more difficult to draft. So either way, very interesting, and I think it's got a cool place in this cube.
Yeah, I would honestly love to see a Naganodel like come together. I think the problem I've seen, because I participated in 2 of these test drafts, is that if multiple people are going for the Beast Box deck and they both since there's only 2 Naganodels, you don't really have a good signal that the line is open or not. Maybe towards the end, but it's really hard to tell, because if someone takes Naganodel early and then gets off the line, you only have access to 1 Naganodel. So I think if you get fortunate enough to maybe, if you really are wanting to play this line and you can force it, I think it could potentially be really good, because if you get both beast rates early, people tend to not take the point pools. That people don't tend to value ultra conversion that highly. So you should be able to set up a pretty good draw engine, and some of the ultra beasts are pretty uncontested as well. I mean, you're probably unlikely to draw into cards like Buzzwole, which we talk about later when we talk about fighting, but other ones like maybe the Nihilego or even the Pheromosa or the Celesteela or the Kirtana could be pretty good picks up. So if you are able to get into both beast raids in the draft early, and you know that it's safe, I would definitely go for the line. If not, I would be a little bit leery of drafting it. And if you do happen to get it, and you really want to play it, good, I think it could do really well. I don't see why reason why not, because 1 for 120 is very efficient and on stage 1. So I see the potential, but I do just worry about it getting cannibalized by maybe interest from other players or just by random circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest issue with the deck is just going to be whether you can get it to come together.
Right. So moving forward, moving into the Dragons line. So this line's kind of interesting. We have Komoa, which is not something you'd commonly see, and you might be a little bit some players might be a little bit leery when they see Komoa, because Komoa is not traditionally a good Pokemon in the TCG, but I actually happen to be a huge fan of it in this cube. You have 2 really solid attacks on the line topper here, with Shadow Power is 60 damage for 1 fighting, and you can accelerate basic energy from just cover pile to 1 your bench. I mean, we said it before, but it bears repeating. Acceleration in this type of cube is very strong, especially on a 1 prize stage 2 Pokemon. You were just setting up your board with more energy. You are basically giving yourself more. You're keeping your board state a lot more healthy. So even if your Komoa goes down, you're setting up attacks for future turns, and you compare well with other types of attackers, like maybe a Buzzwole GX, maybe something else that's maybe a colorless class you could use. So, but also I really like Scaly Uppercut. So for 90 damage, discard a tool card. This Pokemon does 90 more damage. So we're looking at 2 energies, a lightning and a fighting, for 180. And that can be just really good, just efficient damage output. And the tools in this cube are not too highly contested outside of maybe Choice Band and a few others. So cards like U-Turn Board, which only a handful of decks can utilize, could be a really strong combo with Scale Uppercut, where you can just recycle the U-Turn Board back to your hand, use it with another Scaly Uppercut. Could make for a really strong strategy. And I'll explain why the damage output is actually pretty decent in just a second. But the other Komoa, which I actually think I kind of undervalued at first, is neat, because for Warcry, 2 colorless, it's 30 damage, and if you have fewer Pokemon in play than your opponent, it does 90 more. So I think this is a good Pokemon you can tech with early. You can do a nice cheap 120 damage. Granted, it is a stage 2, so you will have to drop some rare candies to make this come out at a decent time. But that attack itself is pretty efficient for 2 colorless, and its other attack, changing scales for lightning, fighting colorless, was 130. And then during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 30 more damage from attacks. So changing scales is kind of a downside. I don't really know if you want to use that attack too often, but maybe in a stage 1 matchup where you're not as worried about getting knocked out, it could be some good pressure. But I do think that the Scaly Uppercut, the first one we talked about, probably the one I'm most interested in. But I am happy to see this line. It's kind of becoming more of an archetype now. It's starting to work. We saw it get drafted in the test cube and went, I think, 2-1. So definitely potential for it. Connor, what are your thoughts on Komoa?
I really like Komoa now. Originally, I think it was a meme that it should be taken out because it was very bad, and it was. But over the tests, it has really transformed into this fast attacking, high HP, really efficient stage 2 line. and it pairs really nicely with Altaria, which we'll talk about next. But there are just so many tools that Kommo-o can use to get insanely efficient damage. And yeah, it does have to work a little bit harder for it than some other decks might, but the result is a lot better than some other decks. You know, there are very few single prize attackers in this cube that are going to be able to deal 100 to 80 damage for 2 energy reliably, like regardless of what your opponent is doing. So Kommo-o, a lot of potential. We saw a Kommo-o deck go a powerful 2-1 in the test. I believe it may have bricked or something against the matchup that it lost. And I even think that it had a pretty solid shot at winning that match too. It was against Raichu. Kommo-o does a lot of things that Raichu doesn't like, just being efficient and single prize. But that aside, I think that Kommo-o is just super powerful, and would not be surprised to see people taking a second look at it and really gunning for it now that it has had that breakout performance. People are starting to understand that, yes, this line is good. It's very draftable. It's very aggressive. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
I think also an interesting aspect about this line, because we talked about it with the Vikavolt line. Vikavolt has an ability that allows it to have no weakness with stadium play. Kommo just doesn't have any weakness. It's weak to Fairy. There's only one Fairy Pokemon in the cube, and it's not really a common Pokemon people are going to tag with. So you reasonably expect that in most all your games, you're not getting hit for weakness, which I think is a huge uptick to why this line has potential as well.
Yeah, definitely. Having no weakness in high power is so huge. And if you can just guarantee that you never have weakness, then that's a very strong upside.
Yeah, and I think last thing on this line too is that I don't think it's too highly contested. Just like I said, most players aren't too interested in Kommo, but that plays really well if if you're listening to this and you want to get a deck that's maybe on the DL that people aren't necessarily going to be super heavy for, like Decidueye. Kommo's a great choice because you get the 3 Scaly Uppercuts and build around it. I think honestly you got some top 8 potential deck here.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with the double dragons in the cube, it really has all the tools that it needs to succeed.
And speaking of tools, its stage 1 line is a perfect combo piece for it. It's Altaria. And what Altaria has is Fight Song, which is 2 of the dragon ones. And what it does is your dragon types do 20 more damage. So that can be really good. So you're already doing 180 with Scale Uppercut. That bumps up to 200. 200 on a 1 prize Pokemon that's attacking for 2 energy is insane. It would have been great if it was GX. So I think Altaria definitely adds to what Kommo's potential can be. I feel like it's kind of, I don't feel like you're going to have any trouble getting into the Fight Song Altarias because Kommo is really the only line that can utilize it. So, but if you do happen to have both in play, you are hitting for 220. Choice Band puts you up to 250. So I think there's definitely potential for a Kommo deck to really come out here and to be strong. The other Altaria, which I'll mention briefly, is the most recent one, is the Miraculous Charm. It's like just exactly like Decidueye. Prevents all damage done by Vs and GXs. So I find this to be a little bit less strong than Decidueye, but perhaps if you wanted to build some sort of wall strategy, or if you wanted to include it in your deck to maybe stall out some games, there could be some potential there. Connor, what are your thoughts on Altaria? Maybe the Miraculous Charm, because I feel like the implicit value of Fight Song is pretty obvious.
Yeah, so my thinking on Miraculous Charm, you're just not going to be able to build a deck around it. But I do like it as a kind of a checkmate card. If your opponent's not careful, if you can get them down into a very specific board state, into a state with a very specific set of resources alive, then Miraculous Charm could put them in a position where they can't win the game, which is really interesting because it's not something that you can just bank on, but it is something that you can run kind of like a 1 of or even a 2 of. If you want to kind of plan to lean into that Altaria a little bit more in the late game and kind of force your opponent to set up a non-GX attacker, knock it out, you revenge it with Kommo-o, and then you present another Altaria. So there are interesting angles that you can take there, and some decks are definitely going to be very vulnerable to that sort of strategy. So something to keep an eye on, but I would strongly advise against trying to build a deck entirely around that because way too many decks in this cube are just not that reliant on GXs.
Yeah, especially the next one we already talked about. So we go to stage 2, fighting, and we're looking at Machamp. And it's funny because this Machamp actually just came out. That's a line topper. It's the one from, I believe it's Champion's Path, where it came out from. So it has for fighting colors, which is kind of rare on a fighting Pokemon to have a 2 energy cost, which is why this is great. does 20 damage for each fighting Pokemon in your discard pile. So it's a revenge attack. You know, it's a lot like Vespiquen or Flareon. So it has a nice efficient attack that lets you do a lot of damage. And the other attack, which is also pretty solid too, for 2 fighting from colorless, which is about on par for fighting types, is Dynamic Punch for 200. So basically you could have like a 200 damage beat stick. I think Macho Revenge offers a lot of quickness and agility to the deck, allows it to set up pretty quickly. You do have 2 copies of the Fighting Fury Machamp, which allow you to do 20 extra damage. So you can boost that damage up, but I just think Macho Revenge is just very efficient. Connor, you were talking about this line before we started the podcast episode. What are your thoughts on Macho Revenge?
Oh man, I want to test this line so bad. I really want to try it out before the weekend, and fortunately, I should have the opportunity to do that, or at least try to draft it tomorrow. Macho Revenge is just such a cool attack. There are a lot of different options in the cube for getting cards into the discard, and Macho Revenge is just such a sweet way to take advantage of that. So fighting colorless is a great attack cost on a stage 2 in this cube. You're pretty much always going to be able to do that early on, and without too much effort, you're going to be able to keep it up in the mid and late game. And it just scales so well. So in the early game, it might be 80 to 100 damage. In the mid game, you can probably start to swing pretty respectably, 180, 200. But then in the late game, it's just one-shotting everything. So Machamp just becomes this extremely, extremely powerful card. Dynamite Punch in the back is a very scary attack as well. Just presenting 200 damage at any point for another attachment is really great. Downside of attack or hitting yourself for 50 is significant, but in the situations where you'd use it, I don't think you'd put yourself in a position where that would be terribly devastating to you. In addition, the Fighting Fury Machamp not only makes your Macho Revenges even more powerful with fewer fighting Pokemon in the discard, however, it makes your Dynamite Punches one-shot the whole cube. So that is really important to note. There is literally nothing that can survive a Dynamite Punch with 2 Fighting Fury Machamps in play, and I wouldn't necessarily expect that to happen very often, but it is something that is important to acknowledge. So going from no fighting stage 2 into the one that is here now, I am so excited to see this drafted, and I really want to try it myself as well. So we'll see if that's possible.
Could you see the line being at a point where it's too good and maybe changed before the draft?
Possibly. So I think more realistically is that people are going to draft it and realize it's a little bit slow for what this cube kind of needs, and it'll fall out of popularity a little bit. Dynamite Punch's downside is really extreme. You're going to lose a 3 energy stage 2 pretty much every single time after you use it. And Macho Revenge does ask kind of a lot of you in the early game just to get Pokemon in your discard, specifically fighting types. So you're really kind of locking yourself into that one realm there. It is possible that this card could end up being too powerful, but I think it is really going to come down to how well it's drafted. If the player who's playing Machamp drafts it perfectly, then I could see it potentially feeling unfair, but I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I would want a perfectly drafted Machamp deck to feel unfair, just because it is such a cool strategy, and in high power, a perfectly drafted deck should feel unfair. I mean, even a decently drafted deck in high power often feels unfair. So I would be very surprised if it ended up being too good and needed to be nerfed. I could actually see it needing buffed, maybe, but that's speculation at this point. I think it's just something that needs to be run, and if it's not able to be tested on Wednesday, like if no one's able to put the deck together, then I would not be uncomfortable with it going through to Saturday.
Yeah, I'm looking at the line too, and I do agree. Macho Revenge sounds like a very interesting attack, and I do love how it plays in all parts of the game. And I think this would honestly be a really undervalued line that you could sneak in and draft pretty easily, because it's untested, and that could be good or bad. But if people aren't really too hyped up on Machamp, that could just play into your favor, where you're maybe looking to draft a very consistent, streamlined strategy, and Machamp obviously has the potential to win the cube. It looks on paper a very strong line, so I would definitely eye up this line as maybe if you're looking for again kind of like Como, you're looking for a line that's undervalued but can get you a lot of you can build a really strong deck around it. I would be eyeing up Machamp for that kind of strategy.
Absolutely. It's going to need to be streamlined or else it's not going to work. So
Precisely.
I think it could be really good.
So then moving on to the fighting stage 1, which we mentioned is Lycanroc. Now, that isn't the Lycanroc from Guardians Rising that maybe people are familiar with. It actually is the one from Team Up with the Twilight Eyes. It's basically crushing. It's actually Flare Grunt, the ability. So you evolve it, you can start energy after the opponent's active. As Excel Rock, Fighting DCE. Sure are new DCs in the cube, so 2 colors. Doing 120, pretty moderate damage. And then we have a Splittering Shard. So it's kind of like the Vibrava we talked about in the beginning. It does actually 30 damage for each energy in your opponent's discard. So playing against a deck that has a lot of energy, is maybe running maybe a fire deck could have a lot of energy. I don't know, a lot of cube decks run energy, a lot of energy anyway. So you probably are going to get a lot of value out of Splittering Shards. Also being able to use the Flare Grunt ability can also be devastating because in cube, and especially with a cube without DCE, your attachments are very important. So being able to slow that down, especially for decks that are not so quick on the draw all the time, you're definitely putting yourself in a better spot. It's also worth noting there are 2 copies of the Boiling Point Lycanroc. So if your opponent has any GX or EX in play, its attack costs are 3 colors less, so virtually free. Which in a cube that's centered around GXs, I would, and it's sort of implied you're gonna be able to use Boiling Blood pretty efficiently. Now its attack is Voltage Claw, so 60, and if your opponent's active has any special energy attached to it, it does 70 more damage. So you're doing probably 60 more often than not. But if you do play into a deck that is more maybe trying to use Rainbow Energy, maybe they're trying to use any of the special energies that have different typing effects, you can do a great, and 130 is a great amount of damage for no commitment. So I would definitely look at this to be pretty easy card to tech into other decks if you think you maybe want to share up some other matchups. But I see the Lycanroc GX get drafted in different ways. I know you drafted it kind of when you played your most recent test draft. What do you think of Lycanroc?
I thought it was great. Thought it was super powerful. The GX's GX attack is so powerful in cube. Splintered Charge GX, just a single fighting energy, 30 times each energy your opponent's discard pile. That is so often going to be a one-hit knockout, especially in the late game. There are a couple of decks that can play around it more effectively, but not all of them. And even some of the decks that can play around it well are going to struggle to get around it, especially in the late game. So just a 1 energy 1 shot is always very nice, even if it does use up your GX attack. And then the Boiling Blood one, I played 2 of them in my deck over the weekend, and there was no point in any game where Voltage Claw actually cost energy to use. So it is always going to be up, essentially, except for maybe a few fringe matchups that don't play GXs. But Voltage Claw, free for 60 is not bad. In the mid game, it's not what you're looking for sure. But it can be a really nice kind of springboard for situations where you maybe need to get an extra energy down, especially thinking about things like Machamp might be able to take really good use of it just because it is going to be able to soften up whatever your opponent is attacking with, and it gives you a little bit of breathing room. Maybe you only have 1 energy on a Machamp, you need another turn to get another energy down. Lycanroc can be really great for that. And in those circumstances where your opponent does have a special energy attached, it's not that rare for that to happen in this cube. 0 energy for 130 damage is really nice. So very powerful card. I enjoy it a lot. I think it is versatile, but not crazy. It's not a card that I'm going to try to jam into anything, but any deck that I really want a fighting attacker or is going to be able to take advantage of having fighting Pokemon like Machamp, Lycanroc is going to be a great choice.
So, not to dive too far into the basics in this cube, but I do find Buzzwole GX to be sort of interesting, and you've drafted with it. How did you feel Buzzwole fared in a cube like this?
It was good, but it was not as good as I thought it would be. The Jet Punch 30-30, we forget that when Buzzwole GX was in standard, Jet Punch was not a 30-30 attack. Right. Jet Punch was 50-30 or 70-30 or 80-30 or even more than that between Strong Energy, Dancy Prism Star, Choice Band, Beast Energy, so many different ways to make that attack stronger on the first turn. And it was often a 60-30 because your opponent would have a Zorua in the active. So lots and lots of things made that Pokemon seem a lot better than it was. Knuckle Impact is a great attack, don't get me wrong. 3 fighting for 160. However, it is not versatile. It's not something that you can slot into other decks easily. You need to be playing heavy fighting to be able to get it off, because 3 fighting energy and no colorless requirements means that any non-fighting attachment to a Buzzwole is going to be totally wasted. Knuckle Impact, I mean, 3 for 160 on a basic is nice. Don't get me wrong. But it's not the end of the world. And a lot of the time in my experience, Buzzwole maybe took a knockout and then just got revenged, and it felt fine. It didn't feel crazy powerful. I would struggle to see a situation where it felt broken at all. Absorption GX is Stalazzle GX's attack, but worse. It can clean up games when you need it to, but usually Buzzwole GX is going to hit the active spot much earlier than Absorption is going to be useful. So overall, if I saw it pack 1, I would still probably take it. Because it is still a very powerful aggressive tool, one of the best basics in the cube. However, it's not a deck. Like, it is not going to be able to make a deck on its own. It is not a defining engine for a deck. I thought that it would be when I built my deck over the weekend. And honestly, what ended up defining the deck more than the Buzzwole GX was the Lycanroc and the Stalazzle. So that was really surprising to me. And I think it's an experience that people will have a lot over the weekend.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth bringing up for people that are drafting this cube. And I think this happens a lot with when there's cards that people have played with when they were in their prime. So Buzzwole is a perfect example where you see this card and you have this knee-jerk reaction of, wow, this card's insanely broken. I remember when Buzzwole Lycanroc was the deck, and that deck was insane. And then you draft the card, and it's still good, but it's not what it used to be. And there's reasons for that, right? And you touched on those perfectly, that it doesn't have, the context isn't there. So you're not going to be facing against a bunch of Zeruas. You're not guaranteed all of what Jet Punch was before. You don't have stuff like Diancie Prism Star with Beast Energy to boost that attack to ridiculous numbers. But that's not to say the card isn't good. There's also a lot the card brings to the table. But I just want to encourage listeners who are see these cards, like, take a second to think about what deck you're wanting to put this in before you just knee-jerk drafting some of these cards. I think Buzzwole is maybe just a great card draft in general, but it's not what it used to be. So you're not going to be able to build like a Buzzwole Lycanroc deck like of olden times. But you can look at the card maybe in a different light, and maybe there's other strategies you can use with it, and maybe it does pair really well into fighting. So I just really wanted to hear your experiences because I know you drafted this card.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot better in a deck that can scale into that Knuckle Impact pretty readily. So, straight fighting decks or heavy fighting decks, I could see that being Beast Box. I could see that being Machamp. I'm sure there are a couple of decks, maybe even like Galissapod could do something like that, which would be really neat. And it is nice to just be able to diversify that weakness a little bit more. Fighting is pretty cleanly split between grass and psychic weaknesses, and Buzzwole helps with that a lot. So, also decks that have heavy switching outs, so things like, I think in this cube it's just like Escape Rope and Switch, because I don't think Floatstone's in here, is it?
There's Bird Keeper if you count that.
Oh, Bird Keeper definitely does count, but it's harder to get into a Buzzwole on turn 1, and when you don't have a bunch of them in your deck, when you don't have 3 Baby Buzz and 2 GXs or 4 GXs, starting it and getting into it super fast is not going to be as feasible, and Jet Punch does not feel very good in the middle of the game. So definitely something to keep in mind. Is it a powerful card? Absolutely. Is it a card that is going to define your deck or define the draft? Almost certainly not.
Yep, I think that's the best you can put it. So then moving on, I guess, to the antithesis of fighting is our dark type. So I guess we can talk about this more in general. It's more of like a dark box kind of strategy. So it is a 6/4 Weavile GX line. So it's 4 Weavile GXs, which Weavile GX is probably most people are familiar with. It has the Shadow Connection ability, allowing you to maneuver dark energies however you see fit. So you can move your basic dark energy around however you want. The attacks are a little bit less relevant. I guess 3 for 130 is, so-so. The GX attack allows you to put as many basic Pokemon down as you want. Again, very so-so. But really, this is the sum of its parts here. There's a lot of dark basics here that you can use to attack. Connor, do you want to explain this line and maybe how it works and what you could draft it with?
Yeah, so ideally you're gonna aim to go for your maybe Hoopa with Evil Admonition, or one of the Eviltalls in the cube. There are 2 Oblivion Wing Eviltalls with Oblivion Wing and Darkness Blade. There is an Eviltall with Derail and Clutch. So a lot of cheap, decent damage attacks, and you're going to want to scale that into some of your big scary attacks. Things like Guzzlord GX, things like Vortex of Darkness Darkrai, or Dark Raid Darkrai, which deals 160 if you used your GX attack. Things like that, things that are really going to be able to take advantage of the energy. I also want to call out that it is very possible to use non-dark Pokemon in a deck like this. Back when we saw this card do well in Standard, it was, a toolbox of exclusively dark types, but that's not necessary in a format like this cube. Any good attacker that has predominantly colorless attack costs is going to be able to take good advantage of this, and any efficient attacker in general could easily slot into the deck. So I think something like a Trashalinch Garbodor could be amazing in a deck like this because it shores up some of your weaknesses to fighting, and it also is just another super efficient attacker. And this dark deck is definitely going to want to be really aggressive in the early game, and then go back into these heavy hitters in the late game and try to preserve energy in any way that it can. So lots of neat tools. I definitely want to see it tested. I'm not totally sold on it at the moment, but I see a lot of ways that it can be powerful, and I'm very hopeful for it.
Do you see any potential for this to not be in the draft this Saturday, or do you think it's pretty much locked in that Dark Box will be present?
If we draft it and the general consensus is that it is unplayable, then I think it would come out. But I couldn't possibly see it being insanely overpowered, especially not in context of some of the other stuff in here. So the only reason why it might be gone is if it's completely unplayable, but I don't really see that being the case right now. I think it has a lot of potential.
Yeah, and I think if it was unplayable, there are definitely enough dark tools you could add, or enough dark attackers you could add to the toolkit to get it there. So I have high hopes that Dark Box will definitely be included. And again, if you want to see a current list of the draft, one that we aren't even aware of yet because it's in the future, just check the link in the description. We'll have it all that updated there. So I guess kind of one of the more, I think, fun lines, we're getting towards the end of it here, is the Alolan Executor line. And I find this line to be so amusing. It has the paired Alolan Executors with the grass and the dragon. They all have the same attack. Tropical Shake, 1 grass energy, 20 damage for each basic and each different type of basic energy in your discard pile. So you can scale this up to 120. I think I have a St. Louis soft spot for this card just because one of our very own, Zach Zamora, did very well with this card back in the day. So I always love seeing this card come out in Cube. I saw someone who drafted it, had a very good time with it, and it seems like it honestly holds up pretty well if you get it engine built around. What are your thoughts with the Tropical Shake?
Yeah, I think it's a great deck. I think it has a ton of potential. It has even more tools than it did have over the weekend. And over the weekend it only lost to a brick, which I do think is more of a concern with this deck than it might be with others. But really cost-effective attack, 1 for 120 on a 160 HP stage 1 attacker. Very threatening, for sure. So I would definitely keep an eye on this. It also can receive buffs from Lorantis on the grass side and Altaria on the dragon side. So lots going on and lots that people could definitely take advantage of. So keep an eye out for it. Let's see how it does on Wednesday as well. As when this video goes up, it will be determined essentially how powerful this is, or if it was drafted on Wednesday. But I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye out for it on Wednesday. It's one of my top decks to test just because I actually think this deck has the potential to be too powerful, and I could see it being axed from the cube by Saturday.
So that's just even more. If you see it on Saturday, it's still going to be a pretty strong deck. I think it has, like you said, very efficient attack cost. It's just the build around is what's going to be important. So you have to build the deck to work. You can't just draft the line and expect things to happen. So if you're interested in this line, and assuming that is available to you on Saturday, make sure you are thinking about how you're going to get those energies to the discard. There are a lot of good effects to make that happen, but you do have to draft them. So just keep a lookout. I think that'd be a great card to look at. Now, I think the last line that we haven't talked about yet, and it's probably one of the most contested, or at least the one of the most talked about, is the Silvally line. So it was our pack 1 pick in the Crack-a-Pack for good reason. It's a 3-3 split between the Gyro unit, Silvally, which we talked enough about, so I'll just highlight it. It's Turbo Drive, 120, attach energy to your bench, great Excel, Rebel GX, very strong GX attack. And then you have the Disc Reload, which is another great card. Basically, the ability allows it to you can draw up to 5, which means you're gonna be able to have a good hand refresher. Brave Buddies, two colorless, 50 plus 70 more if you played a supporter. It's very efficient attack cost. Ideally, with this card, considering you have draw, you can reasonably expect to play a supporter every turn, assuming you have enough supporters to play, but you should if you're playing cube deck. So I think this card has very efficient damage output. Silver Knight GX, be able to knock out Ultra Beasts could be relevant depending on like if there's Buzzwall you're dealing with the Ultra Beasts. But I think these two in conjunction pair really well. I think this pairs with a lot of different lines in the cube. It's definitely one of the most versatile lines we've seen. Connor touched in the Cracker Pack that the Titanols have a lot of pressure you can put with their cheap attacks. So I think this has been a very popular line. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this line, Connor.
Yeah, I mean, unless I'm in Machamp or maybe Raichu, something that's already weak to fighting, I'm probably gonna try to put Silvally GX into my deck if I draft it. I would generally say that the Turbo Drive one is more of a priority than the Disc Reload one. The Disc Reload one, not bad for sure, but the Turbo Drive and Rebel are just so good. Silver Knight GX on the other one is a decent GX attack. Rebel is probably one of the best in the cube. It's just the case for Silvally GX with Gyro Unit Turbo Drive is definitely there. So if I see that card early on, I'm gonna slam it. I'm gonna try to put it in my deck. However, it isn't insane. It's definitely one of the lines that we're looking at and kind of observing, seeing how it plays out, seeing if it needs, nerfed in some way. But it's not something that you can really just make its own deck. You're really topped out with that damage on Turbo Drive. Rebel is going to be a great one-time attack, but 120 damage every turn is not exactly where you want to be at in this cube. And while it is a great support piece for so many reasons, it's not your deck, and it's not going to be your deck. So I'll be really interested to see how this card plays out. There is a small chance that it gets removed for the cube on Saturday, but the more that I look at it, the more I look at the rest of the cube, it is strong, yes, but I just don't see it being too powerful to be allowed.
I think it's just a good card. I don't think it's broken by any means. I mean, it has great attacks, but it's just a solid card, and it pairs really well with other decks. So, I mean, the big reason we talk about this is just saying, be aware that this card could be really strong in a lot of decks. So if you see it, we pack one picked it in our Cracker Pack, so it's definitely worth taking early so you can pair it with a lot of other attackers.
Absolutely.
So then I guess it's also worth noting there's a lot of other support Pokemon in this cube. And you do have a small Quagsire line. We have the Macargo and Pidgey lines for draw. You do have, like you said, Garbodor is like a small presence in this cube. So you do have a lot of mix and match pairs in this. Am I missing any of the sport lines? I guess also a Alola Ninetales Gx is in this cube as well.
Electro GX is another good one.
Oh yeah, you gotta pop the Trode, right? You gotta go Electro GX.
I don't see it making waves in many decks. I think maybe Machamp is probably the best deck for it, or Golisopod. Just a single prizer deck that forces your opponent to take a bunch of single prizes, but you could also put your opponent in tricky end situations. So I don't know, hard call, but maybe we see it do something. I don't expect it to. I would not be surprised if it completely bombed out or nobody played it, but it's such a light space requirement, and it definitely could be something that people will find something amazing to do with. So not opposed to it being in the cube in any way.
I will say, when Electro Check makes its way into top 8, that is the first thing we are streaming, guaranteed.
Oh yes, that will definitely be on stream. Doesn't matter what their time zone is, it will happen.
Exactly. So, any other lines that I'm missing, or do you think we covered it all?
Trash Knight's Garbodor. I don't think we talked about that one at all. It's not like a main line, but it is definitely interesting. 3/2 Trash Lance Garbodor. Something to keep in mind, the item count in this cube has come up pretty significantly, so we could see that being a player. I do like it in decks with flexible energy lines, so definitely could be something we see. But other than that, I think that's everything that I've really got in my sights for this cube.
Fair enough. So, top 3 decks in that you're considering in this line.
Top 3 decks. So it's tough to distinguish between the 3 decks that I want to test the most. from the 3 decks that I think are the best. The 3 decks that I want to test the most, as of the recording of this video, are Machamp, Alolan Exeggutor, and Beast Box. I would really love to test any of those decks. But the decks that I think are the best at the current moment, I think Stalazzle, just decks that make use of Stalazzle GX and Roast Reveal, are super powerful. Raichu right now, probably one of the strongest lines in the cube. I could be proven wrong tomorrow, very wrong, but at the moment, as of what we saw over the weekend, I think that was the case. And man, I think Alolan Exeggutor and Kommo-o are both in a really scary spot as far as being single prize attackers that can just put out a ton of damage for such little commitment and really force the opponent to do a lot.
Yeah, fair enough. So I'll try to touch on a few different decks. I do agree about Raichu being a strong card, and hopefully we'll see how it all pans out. A deck, man, if you could just guarantee the pieces, I think Beast Box could actually be a very strong contender in this cube, just because of the Ultra Beast quality in this cube in particular is very strong. Beast Raid's really nice. I think we're doing 120 for 1 energy. It's a colorless energy too, so you can diversify your strat. Gives you some good flexibility. If you were lucky enough to get that with the Buzzwole, you would have a lot of good coverage. You'd actually be able to do a lot of a lot of solid damage. And I also think like other attacks like the Nihilego for the Nightcap's really strong. You have Sledgehammer Buzzwole. You have Kartana, which is basically enhanced hammer with allows you to take a free prize. There's just a lot of ways you can play it. I also think it has a consistent built-in draw engine with ultra conversion. Allows for deck thinning. We have cards like Ultra Space, which we always talked all about stadiums. So stadiums in this cube are pretty solid. So Ultra Space would be a very good fit in this cube too. So I don't know. I feel like the problem with Naganodel though is that you aren't guaranteed to get the pieces that you need. So I think in a perfect world, if I could draft a Naganodel deck and get those pieces, I would feel really good about it. I agree with Stalazzle. I think Stalazzle plus Lorantis to me sounds like an insanely strong deck. Stalazzle plus anything sounds really strong. Lorantis and Stalazzle kind of fit into that middle for me. Like those two are like probably some of the highest cards I'm looking for. And then I also think like I'm kind of talking in pairs, I guess, but I think Silvally itself is fairly strong. Gyro Unit in particular being paired with other cards, Gyro Unit being paired with the other Silvally is very strong. It's like any deck with Silvally seems like it's going to be if as long as it makes sense, could possibly be really good in this cube for Cube League.
Yeah, the Lorantis Stalazzle deck I could definitely see just being really strong on its own. With the number fixing from the little Lorantis, can deal 2 for 150 on the Stalazzle. You can deal 1 for 80 attached to on the Lorantis, 170 for 3, heal 30. The GX attack on Lorantis is really nice. And then you can take advantage of Roast Reveal too. So really scary deck there. I definitely have that one on my radar as well. But it's tough. I think Stalazzle plus stage 1 is a recipe for success, but obviously Lorantis has so many inherent synergies with it. I could see Lorantis Lycanroc. That's the deck that I played over the weekend. I could see Lorantis Golisopod, Stalazzle Golisopod, Stalazzle Lycanroc. Are there any other great partners? I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure I could. If I look through this queue, I'm sure I could find tons of stuff that synergizes with Stalazzle, and none of it would be surprising. So, just lots and lots of cool stuff that you can use with Stalazzle and Lorantis as well. I would be really surprised if those decks bombed out.
I would too. They just seem like they're doing like really efficient damage output. And you're not really gridlocked into like one strategy. You can generally maneuver around to other attackers, so that's why Lorantis pairs really well with different cards. Stalazzle and Lorantis share a lot of similar qualities. I think that's why they would work really well together. They're both very efficient attackers. They both allow for a lot of unique synergies. So I would be on the lookout for those cards. I feel like those have been a little bit undervalued in some of the drafts. So that plus the Silvally, I think for me are like some of the top cards I could see. I would love to see like an insane Beast Box deck. I feel like it exists, but hard to say if we're going to see it in this league, but it would be cool.
Definitely. Right now, I think this cube has so many powerful decks that have not really been explored that much, and the league is just going to be such a cool experience seeing all of these different decks come out.
So something I just want to touch on just very briefly is, because I know you play a very active role in the sort of the forming these sort of the I guess like getting these cubes ready for Cube League. Can you just describe really like what is that process like? Like what does it take to get a cube from okay, we want to run this cube to we're going to do it for the Cube League?
Yeah, absolutely. So the initial formulating whether we want to run a cube, the things that really catch our attention. So for anybody listening to this episode who wants to have their cube run for Cube League in the future, this is really good information for you. The big thing that makes us want to run a cube for Cube League at all is an active builder who is receptive to criticism. That's a really big thing. And a cube that's just interesting. It's fun to play, that we haven't seen before. And you know, it doesn't even have to be the most balanced on the first run through. We've played some cubes for the league that on first attempt did not go well at all. And that's okay. If we see potential and we see that a cube could be a lot of fun, it's a really interesting premise, things like that, those stand out to us, and those are really important to us. So this cube was in a really unique spot with its power level, in a really unique spot with its construction and strategies. When we first tested it, I think it was in a very different place from where it is now, but it still kind of has that same essence. And there are just so many neat things going on with this one. So the process that we kind of went through for balancing, and the process that we kind of always go through, is test it. So we look it over first. If there are any obvious standout cards, it's like, you know, this is just going to dominate the draft, and we call those out before we get into it. But we're more accommodating to lines that, you know, this is probably going to be too good, but maybe not. Things like that we would probably axe for a league if we were getting closer. We let through more regularly in the test, partially because we don't look at cubes as closely when we're just running them for fun, and also because, you know, we can always be surprised, we can always be wrong. So with this cube and with all cubes, we just ran it the first time for fun, because, you know, every cube we play in the group is technically a potential test for the Cube League, but it's just for fun. You know, we run cubes just to let their cube owners play them and to have a community and have a good time. So once we've kind of narrowed down and said, I think this is a good candidate for the league, then we take a closer look at it. We, you know, take information from the test, from what people have said, from what our observations have been, and we send those to the builder. And we basically tell them that we want to test it again. We set it up for another test. If it's something that we're really excited about, sometimes we'll even tell them that we would like to run it for a cube or for a league in the future. I know with Vent's cube, we probably told him 4 or 5 months ago that we would be looking forward to testing this more because it could be a good league cube. So I mean, these things do take time. You know, we have to have a really high, really strong level of balance for our events because we have such a large pool of drafters and we have such a large pool of skilled drafters that if a cube is not well balanced, then an event will not be fun and it will not feel fair. So those are really important things for us. And for that reason, it can take a really long time to get a cube tested out enough. I will say that in general, the big thing that may not be obvious is if a cube is really similar to another one that we've already played, we're going to be a lot less likely to pick that one because we really like diversity. I mean, it could, you know, in like a year's time when that cube is so far away that it's not really a thought anymore, then that could be an opportunity. But in general, we look for new, exciting stuff. And in the case of this cube specifically, there was a lot of testing that went into it, and there's still even more testing. So we've run this cube 5 times, I think, 4 or 5 times between different pods, maybe even 6, because we had 2 pods and then 2 pods, and then we've tested it, I believe, twice before. So lots of testing and lots of time and lots of alterations have gone into this cube. And sometimes it's more of a process, sometimes it's less of a process. We've had cubes that we've run, and it's been like, okay, swap these two lines and it's good to go. And we've had cubes that we've played, and much like in the case of this one, said this cube is a lot of fun, it has a lot of potential, but it's not there yet. It needs reworked and probably fairly significantly. And that's totally okay, and we give it the time that it needs, and when we feel it's ready, then we push it forward to the event. So it's kind of just a look inside of our process. It's not super cut and dry, it's not super defined, but those are the general steps that we tend to follow.
Yeah, and I thought I'm glad you could explain that, because I think something that people might not know is just there's this whole like process going behind everything that is making all of this possible. So like there's a lot of testing, there's a lot of evaluating, and there's a lot of organizing that goes on. And I know you play a super heavy role in that, as you're the Discord owner, so you do a lot of managing the admin team. And I just think I want to put some spotlight on that. I think people could appreciate there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and it's interesting.
Yeah, the admins are very involved with the balancing process. Pretty much every time a cube is run, we have a sit down. I'll ask, how were the cubes that we ran today? Did people enjoy them? Do they think that they're in a good place as far as balance? Things like that. And that's pretty much every single cube we run, that we go through that process. So there is so much going on behind the scenes. The admins do really try and help people out with balancing. A lot of the changes that people come forward with are at least partially influenced by the admins. I mean, we definitely don't take the cube building out of the cube builders' hands by any means, but we do play a very active role in making sure a cube that comes to League is balanced and fun. So that's really important to us, and we try and help in any way we can there.
Yeah, no, I think you guys do a great job. And honestly, if anyone listening to this would like to also be a part of this process, Cube Weekend has offered a lot of insight for cube builders. So by participating in these cubes, I mean, there's a whole channel dedicated to cube to testing results. So if you would like to draft some of these cubes, especially the ones that are kind of teed up for these things, those are kind of done through the Cube Weekends, it seems. So you just hop on there and you have some feedback for whatever cube you drafted. It's always a very positive experience. A lot of people always appreciate getting feedback. So if you like kind of be sort of part of that process as well, because I know a lot of input for this cube is also given from just regular players who've drafted, which I think is great. A lot of community effort. You can get involved right now. But we've talked far too long. This has been a great segment to sort of deep dive into what to expect this weekend, and we'll be right back with our closing thoughts in just a second. All right, welcome back to the conclusion section of this episode. So we've talked at length about this Gen 7 All-Stars cube, and if these decks sound like something you'd be interested in playing, well, there is a small window of opportunity to get in on this Cube League draft. The signups are already available, and of course, those links are in the description. And the draft itself will be starting this Saturday at 12 p.m. Central and 6 p.m. Central. So there are two different times that you can draft. There's a lot of different time zones we're dealing with here, so we're trying to accommodate to all different types of players. So I guess the easiest way to get probably into the Cube League is just joining the Discord, right?
Yeah, join the Discord. Read over the last few announcements. It's got all the info for the event. It's got the list for the cube. It's basically got everything you need. So just mosey on over, give it a look, and you can sign up on the Battlefy. You'll be good to go. All you have to do is show up, other than, of course, registering for the event in advance. So please do that. You are not absolutely required to do that. You can show up and then register afterward, but it's a lot easier for us as far as planning is concerned. So definitely register if you're able.
So does registration close at any particular time?
It closes when the draft starts.
Oh, okay. So players can show up like when the draft starts as well. I mean, obviously better if you sign up early, but...
Yeah, it's going to be open. If you're not sure you're going to be available that day, you don't want to sign up, then that's totally fine. Just show up and make sure you sign up in those last few minutes before you actually hop into the Discord call.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of explain how the process works. So when you are signed up, all you have to do is, assuming you've joined the Discord at this point, just basically when the time comes for your draft, whether you're doing the 12 p.m. or the 6 p.m. draft, just show up. You'll see everybody in voice. Pretty much from there, you'll get put into pods of how many people you guys are dividing by. I guess sometimes varies, doesn't it? It's kind of depending on how many people are available. And then pretty much the admins sort of take care of the work from there. So all you really have to do is show up and then just kind of go wherever you're supposed to go. You get put into a drafting sheet for you to draft in. And if you aren't familiar with that, you can check out our YouTube channel where we actually have recorded our draft for Champions Cube. Basically see how the drafter works. Honestly, it's very simple. All you have to really do is just pick a sheet for you to draft in, and then it's just clicking cards at that point. It's very simple, very streamlinable. So if you're at all nervous about maybe drafting remote or aren't quite sure that it's, you're going to be able to get it all down, I guarantee you it is quite simple. And even if it might look intimidating, it really only takes just one or two goes at it. And that's just not even saying much to really, get the handle of it. And building your deck in Untap is pretty simple. Playing in Untap is pretty simple. Honestly, I found it, I don't even think about using it anymore. It's just, once you get used to all the hotkeys and the macros in Untap, it's actually pretty streamlinable. Any tips, Connor, I guess, on getting used to all of that?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing is just learn those hotkeys and Untap as fast as possible. It makes your life so much better. The Google Sheets drafter, use the inbuilt sorting features, the little arrows and filters and such that are in the table with all your cards. Those work wonders for sorting your deck. Use the checkboxes, use the stuff that's there essentially, and that will help you organize your cards, organize your thoughts a lot better. So for Untap, learn the shortcuts. For the Google Sheet, use the sorting features that are built there for you.
Yeah, those sorting features are great. It definitely makes it a lot easier to see what you're working with. I also love how the types of the Pokemon are color coded, so you can see all the different types you have available to you or what you've drafted. I think it makes it a lot easier to use.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
So also, I mean, if you're out there looking for a competitive cube experience, I highly recommend this event. It's definitely probably one of the most accessible competitive events in Cube that you can find because it doesn't require any purchasing of any software. It just requires an internet connection, which if you're listening to this podcast, I would assume most people have an internet connection. So you just need access to Google Sheets, which is free, and Untap, which is free. And then in turn, you get to play against some of the best Cube players in the Cube Discord, as well as people who are, taking this seriously. So great way to test your skills. I feel like I'm always refining my skills in these kind of drafts, and it's a very fun way to get involved. You get to meet a lot of different people through the drafts and through the games. I feel like I've probably got the best acquainted with people through the Cube League just because you are just kind of put against people all the time. And it kind of breaks that barrier of not knowing people because you get to talk to them during your games. So I find this is a great way to get involved with the community, especially if you're sitting at home like we are during COVID and are missing some of that social interaction. You can come get it while cubing this Saturday. So I highly recommend you guys sign up. Also, on that note, so if you aren't able to participate or maybe you're doing the early draft, we are actually going to be streaming a pre-recording of the second draft. So the 6 p.m. draft is going to happen. We're actually going to be recording it and commentating in real time and then streaming that recording on Sunday at 5 p.m. Central. So the reason we're not streaming it during the event is because we do want to retain some event integrity. And while we don't think anyone in the Cube League would cheat, we definitely want to we don't want anyone to be held liable or, subject to that. So we want to make sure we're, being honest about it. So we'll have a pre-recorded live stream. And then after that, we'll actually have a little bit of pre-Cube League commentary. So we'll have a chance to at least look at the lists that are submitted, which are public, by the way. And then we can analyze some of the really strong contenders. So if you want to get a lowdown on what's to look out for in this Cube League, definitely tune in Sunday at 5 p.m. Central. You can also just follow us on Twitch at twitch.tv/P3podcast, where you'll get notified when we go live. I also recommend following us on Twitter, where you'll see any updates for the live stream. So with that said, Connor, are you excited for this Cube League? I know I am ready for it to start.
I'm super excited for the Cube League. I'm really excited to test it again tomorrow night, get it ironed out. I had a great time with it over the weekend. I'm really excited to see what decks come together. I think this will be a great time, and I think people will really enjoy it.
I agree. And hey, if you're looking for cube cards, you'll probably recognize I can't recommend this cube enough. So hopefully we see you guys there on the live stream. If not, I hope you guys tune in to the Sunday's pre-recorded draft to see what exactly is in this cube and what people are drafting with. So without further ado, I think that's going to end this episode on Vince All-Star 7 Gen 7 Cube that we're using for the Cube League. So this has been the P3 Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Martin, brought to you with Connor Lavelle, and we'll see you guys next time.